The day Frank Sinatra, the most powerful man in music, walked into Neil Diamond's office with a blank check and said he'd pay any price for one song, Neil Diamond looked him in the eye and said no. What happened next shocked everyone in the industry and revealed why some things in life simply cannot be bought, no matter how much money you have. You're going to discover why Neil refused an offer that could have made him millions instantly, how Frank Sinatra reacted to being told no for possibly the first time in his career, and what this encounter taught both legends about the true value of art. Stay until the end, because this isn't just a story about two musical giants, it's a story about integrity, artistic ownership, and why the best things in life aren't for sale. Los Angeles, California, March 1971. Neil Diamond was 30 years old and riding high on a wave of success that seemed unstoppable. His songs were dominating the charts, his concerts were selling out across America, and he had established himself as one of the premier singer-songwriters of his generation. But he was still relatively new to the upper echelons of the music industry, still learning how to navigate the complex world of fame, power, and the egos that came with it. Frank Sinatra, on the other hand, was 55 years old and an absolute legend. He wasn't just a singer, he was an institution, a cultural icon who had defined American music for 3 decades. Chairman of the board, Old Blue Eyes, The Voice, Frank Sinatra was a man who had performed for presidents, befriended mob bosses, dated the most beautiful women in Hollywood, and built an empire that extended far beyond music into film, casinos, and business ventures most people didn't even know about. When Frank Sinatra wanted something, he got it. Nobody said no to Frank Sinatra until Neil Diamond. The story began a few weeks earlier when Frank was listening to Neil's latest album in his home studio in Palm Springs. Frank had always appreciated good songwriting, and he recognized immediately that Neil Diamond was something special. The melodies were memorable, the lyrics were meaningful, and there was an emotional honesty in the songs that appealed to Frank's own sensibilities as an interpreter of great material. One song in particular caught Frank's attention. It was a ballad, deeply personal and emotionally raw, about a relationship that had ended but whose memory still haunted the narrator. The song hadn't been released as a single yet. It was just an album track, but Frank heard hit potential in it. More than that, he heard a song that was perfect for his voice, his style, his interpretation. Frank called his manager immediately. "I want that song," he said simply. "The new Neil Diamond ballad. Get it for me." Frank's manager, a man who had been working with Sinatra for 20 years and knew how to make things happen, reached out to Neil Diamond's representatives. The message was clear. Frank Sinatra wanted to record the song, and he was willing to pay handsomely for the privilege. In the music industry of 1971, this was essentially an offer you couldn't refuse. When Frank Sinatra wanted to record your song, you said yes. Not only did it mean a significant payday from the recording and publishing rights, but it also meant prestige, validation, and the knowledge that one of the greatest vocalists of all time thought your work was worthy of his attention. Neil's team was excited. This was Frank Sinatra, after all. They immediately contacted Neil, who was in the studio working on his next album, and told him about the offer. They expected Neil to be thrilled, to immediately agree, to recognize this as the incredible opportunity it was. But Neil's response surprised everyone. "I need to think about it," he said. His manager was confused. "Think about what? This is Frank Sinatra. Do you understand what this means? He wants to record your song. This will make you a fortune and raise your profile even higher." But Neil couldn't explain exactly why he was hesitant. It was just a feeling, an instinct, that something about this didn't sit right with him. The song in question was deeply personal. He had written it during a difficult period in his life, pouring his own experiences and emotions into every line. It wasn't just a commercial product to him, it was a piece of his soul. Over the next few days, the offers from Sinatra's team became more aggressive. They started throwing around numbers, big numbers, the kind of money that could change someone's life. But Neil still hesitated, and that's when Frank Sinatra decided to handle it personally. Frank didn't usually deal directly with songwriters. That's what managers and lawyers were for. But he was intrigued by this young artist who seemed to be hesitating, and frankly, a little annoyed that something he wanted wasn't immediately being handed to him. So Frank called Neil directly. "Neil, this is Frank Sinatra," the voice on the other end of the phone said. That unmistakable voice that had serenaded generations. "I want to talk to you about your song." Neil, despite his success, was still a fan at heart. Talking to Frank Sinatra was surreal. "Mr. Sinatra, it's an honor to hear from you." "Call me Frank. Listen, I love this song of yours. I want to record it. Your people are playing games, talking about thinking it over. What's there to think about? I make you rich. I make your song famous. Everybody wins. What's the problem?" Neil took a breath. "It's not about the money, Mr. Sinatra. I mean, Frank. It's just that the song is very personal to me, and I'm not sure I'm ready to let someone else record it yet." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Frank wasn't used to hearing that money wasn't the issue. In his world, everything had a price. "Kid, everything's personal when you write it, but once you put it out there, it's not just yours anymore. It's art, and art is meant to be interpreted. I've been doing this for 30 years. Trust me, when I record your song, it becomes something bigger than what either of us could do alone." It was a compelling argument, and Neil could hear the sincerity in Frank's voice. This wasn't just about ego or power. Frank genuinely loved the song and wanted to make something special with it. "I appreciate that, Frank, and I'm honored that you want to record it, but can I ask you something? Have you ever written a song?" Frank laughed. "Me? No, kid. I'm a saloon singer. I sell other people's songs. That's my talent. I take what the writers give me, and I make magic with it." "Right. So you've never written something so personal that the thought of someone else singing it feels like they're reading your diary out loud?" Frank was quiet for a moment. He was starting to understand. "I get it," he said finally. "You want to keep it close, but let me ask you something. If I wanted to buy that song outright, make it mine completely, take it off your hands so you never have to think about it again, what would that cost?" Neil was taken aback. "I don't think you understand. I'm not trying to negotiate for more money. I'm saying I don't want to sell it at all. Everything's for sale, Neil. Everything. Name your price." Boom, and that's when Neil realized that Frank Sinatra genuinely didn't understand what he was trying to say. To Frank, who had spent his career interpreting other people's material, songs were commodities, valuable commodities perhaps, but still things that could be bought and sold. He couldn't comprehend that for Neil, this particular song wasn't a product. It was a part of himself. "I'm sorry, Frank, but no. The song's not for sale." The line went quiet for a long moment. Finally, Frank spoke, his voice harder now. "You know what you're turning down here, kid? You know who I am and what I can do for your career?" "I do, and I'm grateful for your interest, but my answer is still no." Frank hung up without saying goodbye. Neil sat there holding the phone, wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his career. Over the next week, the pressure intensified. Frank's team reached out again, this time with even bigger offers. They weren't just talking about recording rights anymore. They were offering to buy the song completely, to make Neil a co-writer on future Sinatra projects, to open doors that would normally take decades to access. But Neil held firm. He couldn't fully explain it, even to himself, but he knew that selling this song, especially to someone as powerful as Frank Sinatra, would feel like betraying something fundamental about who he was as an artist. Then came the call that Neil had been dreading. Frank wanted to meet in person. Not a phone call, not through representatives, but face to face. Frank Sinatra wanted Neil Diamond to come to his office in Los Angeles so they could settle this thing like men. Neil's manager was panicking. You have to go. You cannot refuse a meeting with Frank Sinatra, and when you get there, you say yes to whatever he offers. Do you understand? This man can make or break careers with one phone call. Beeped. But Neil went to that meeting with his mind already made up. He would be respectful, he would be professional, but he would not sell the song. Frank Sinatra's office was exactly what you'd expect. All leather and dark wood, gold records lining the walls, photographs of Frank with everyone who was anyone, from presidents to movie stars to sports legends. Frank himself was sitting behind a massive desk, wearing an impeccably tailored suit, looking every inch the powerful mogul he was. "Sit down, Neil," Frank said, gesturing to a chair. His voice was friendly, but there was an edge to it. Neil sat, trying to appear more confident than he felt. "I appreciate you coming. I thought it would be good for us to talk man to man, without all the managers and lawyers getting in the way. I appreciate the invitation, Frank." "Let me be straight with you," Frank said, leaning forward. "I've been in this business since before you were born. I've seen a lot of talented people come and go. Some of them make it big, some of them don't. And you know what makes the difference? Knowing when to say yes to the right opportunities." He paused, letting that sink in. "I'm offering you one of those opportunities right now. I want this song. I'm prepared to pay you more money than you've probably made in your entire career so far. I'm prepared to record it as the lead single on my next album, which will sell millions of copies. Your name will be on a Frank Sinatra record. Do you understand what that means for your career?" Neil nodded. "I do understand, Frank, and I'm grateful. But my answer is still no." Frank's jaw tightened. "Why? Give me one good reason why you're turning this down." Neil took a breath. "Because if I sell you this song, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Not because of anything you'd do with it. You'd probably make it beautiful. But because every time I heard it, I'd know that I sold a piece of myself for money. I'd know that I put a price on something that shouldn't have a price." Frank stared at him for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled. Not a friendly smile, but a smile of recognition, like he was seeing something in Neil that he hadn't expected. "You've got balls, kid. I'll give you that. Nobody tells me no, not even people a lot more powerful than you. But you just did, twice now, and you're sitting in my office doing it again." Frank stood up and walked to the window, looking out over Los Angeles. "Let me tell you a story. When I was starting out back in the 40s, I was singing with Tommy Dorsey's band. I wanted to go solo, but I was under contract. Tommy didn't want to let me go because I was making him a lot of money. We negotiated, we argued, and finally, I bought my way out of that contract for more money than I had. I had to borrow it, had to make deals with people I probably shouldn't have made deals with." He turned back to face Neil. "But I did it because I knew that staying with Dorsey, even though it was safe and profitable, would mean I'd never become who I was supposed to be. I had to own my own career, my own choices, my own destiny, even if it was scary, even if it was risky." He walked back to his desk and sat down. "I think that's what you're doing right now. You're not just saying no to me, you're saying yes to yourself, to your own artistic integrity, and I can respect that, even if it pisses me off." Neil was stunned. He had expected anger, threats maybe, but not understanding. "Thank you, Frank. That means a lot coming from you." Frank pulled out a folder from his desk. "But here's the thing, Neil. I still want to record one of your songs. Not that one, I get it now. But you've got other great material. Pick one, anyone, and I'll record it. We'll do it right, we'll make something special, and it'll be on terms you're comfortable with." Neil thought for a moment. "What about the title track from my last album? It's got a different feel, more up-tempo, but I think it would suit your style." Frank smiled. "Send me the sheet music. I'll have my arranger take a look at it." They shook hands, and as Neil was leaving, Frank called out to him, "Neil, one more thing. That song you wouldn't sell me. Keep it. Record it yourself when you're ready, and make it so damn good that I'll kick myself for not pushing harder." Neil laughed. "I'll do my best. And kid, thanks for teaching this old dog something. It's been a while since someone reminded me that some things matter more than money." The encounter between Frank Sinatra and Neil Diamond became legendary in the music industry, though the details were kept quiet for years. Word eventually leaked out that Neil had turned down Frank Sinatra, and instead of hurting his reputation, it actually enhanced it. People respected an artist who stood by his principles, even when facing pressure from one of the most powerful men in entertainment. Let me ask you a question I want you to answer in the comments. Have you ever had to turn down money or an opportunity because it didn't feel right, even though everyone thought you were crazy? How did it turn out? Share your story, because I think we can all learn from these difficult decisions. Frank did eventually record one of Neil's songs, and it became a hit. The two men developed a mutual respect that lasted for years. They would occasionally run into each other at industry events, and Frank would always greet Neil warmly, joking that he was still waiting for Neil to change his mind about that song. But Neil never did sell that song to anyone else. Years later, he finally recorded it himself on an album that came out in 1975. By then, enough time had passed that the raw emotion had mellowed into something more reflective, and the song became one of his most beloved deep cuts, cherished by fans who appreciated its emotional honesty. In interviews over the years, both Frank and Neil would occasionally reference their encounter, though never giving away too many details. Frank would say things like, "I once tried to buy a song from this young songwriter, and he had the guts to tell me no. I didn't like it at the time, but I respected it. That's the kind of artist who lasts in this business." Neil would say, "Early in my career, I had to make a choice between a lot of money and my artistic integrity. I chose integrity, and I've never regretted it. It taught me that you can't put a price on your soul." The story took on different meanings for different people in the industry. For young songwriters, it became a reminder that they had power, that their art had value beyond what anyone was willing to pay for it, and that saying no to the wrong deal was sometimes more important than saying yes to the right one. For established artists, it was a reminder that newer artists deserved respect, that power and money didn't give you the right to demand compliance, and that sometimes the most valuable things were the ones that couldn't be bought. For the business people, managers, lawyers, and executives, it was a cautionary tale about understanding that artists aren't just content providers, they're human beings with emotional connections to their work that transcend commercial considerations. In the decades that followed, the music industry changed dramatically. The rise of music videos, MTV, digital downloads, streaming services, all of these transformed how music was created, distributed, and consumed. But one thing that never changed was the fundamental tension between art and commerce, between creative integrity and financial success. The story of Neil Diamond saying no to Frank Sinatra became a touchstone in discussions about this tension. Business school professors used it as a case study in negotiation and knowing when to walk away from a deal. Ethics courses used it as an example of integrity under pressure. Music industry seminars referenced it when talking about artist rights and creative control. Frank Sinatra passed away in 1998 at the age of 82. In the tributes and retrospectives that followed, many people talked about his incredible voice, his legendary performances, his influence on American culture. But some also talked about his evolution as a person, how the man who had been known for his demanding nature and quick temper had, in his later years, shown unexpected moments of grace and understanding. The story of his encounter with Neil Diamond was often cited as an example of Frank's ability to respect someone who stood their ground, even against him. At Frank's memorial service, several artists performed, interpreting his classic songs for an audience of family, friends, and industry legends. Near the end of the service, Neil Diamond performed. He didn't sing one of Frank's famous songs. Instead, he sang that song, the one Frank had wanted to buy all those years ago. It was Neil's way of honoring Frank, of saying that even though he couldn't sell him the song in life, he would share it with him in death, performing it at his memorial as a tribute to the complicated, powerful, ultimately respectful relationship they had shared. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. People who knew the story understood the significance of Neil choosing that particular song. It was Neil's way of saying, "You were right, Frank. Some things are more important than money. And one of those things is mutual respect between artists." In the years since, Neil Diamond has told the story more openly, especially after retiring from touring due to Parkinson's disease. In interviews and in his authorized biography, he's discussed the encounter with Frank as one of the defining moments of his career. "That day in Frank's office, I was terrified," Neil admitted. "Here was the most powerful man in music, offering me more money than I'd ever seen, and I was saying no. Everyone thought I was insane, but I knew that if I sold that song, I'd be selling a piece of myself, and once you start doing that, where do you stop?" He continued, "Frank taught me 2 lessons that day. First, that you have to stand up for what you believe in, even when it's scary, even when you're facing someone much more powerful than you. And second, that truly great artists respect other artists who do that. Frank could have destroyed my career with one phone call. Instead, he respected my decision and we became friends. That's class, that's integrity, that's what separates the legends from everyone else." The song itself, the one that Frank wanted to buy, has taken on legendary status among Neil Diamond fans. It's not one of his most famous songs, it was never a big radio hit, but serious fans know it and treasure it. Some call it his most emotionally honest song, the one where you can hear the vulnerability and pain most clearly. Music historians have analyzed the song in depth, written academic papers about its composition and lyrics, and debated what made it so special that Neil refused to sell it even to Frank Sinatra. The consensus is that the song's power comes from its specificity, from the fact that it's clearly about real events and real emotions in Neil's life. And that specificity is what makes it universally relatable. The incident also influenced how future negotiations between artists and other performers were handled. It became more common for songwriters to retain control over who could record their songs, under what circumstances, and for how much. Artist rights became a bigger part of industry conversations, and the balance of power slowly shifted, at least a little bit, from the corporations and established stars toward the creators. Not everyone learned the lesson, of course. There are still countless stories of young artists being pressured to sign away their rights, to accept unfair deals, to compromise their artistic vision for commercial success. But the story of Neil Diamond and Frank Sinatra stands as proof that it's possible to say no, that integrity can coexist with success, and that the best deals aren't always the most lucrative ones. In 2001, 29 years after Frank Sinatra's death, a demo recording surfaced that nobody knew existed. It was Frank singing Neil's song, the one he'd wanted to buy. Apparently, at some point after their meeting, Frank had gone into a studio and recorded a version just for himself, never intending to release it. The recording was discovered in Frank's personal archives, labeled simply Neil's Song, Private. When Neil heard about this, he was deeply moved. Frank had respected his wishes and never released the song commercially, but he had loved it enough to record it anyway, just to have his own version. With the permission of Frank's estate, Neil agreed to let the recording be included in a posthumous Sinatra box set, with all proceeds from that track going to a music education charity in Frank's name. When fans finally heard Frank's version of the song, they understood why he had wanted it so badly. His interpretation was stunning, bringing a different emotional weight to the lyrics, proving that his instinct about the song had been correct. But they also understood why Neil had refused to sell it. The song was so personal, so specific to Neil's experience, that even Frank's beautiful version couldn't quite capture the original intent. It was a song that needed to be sung by the person who had lived it. The release of that recording brought the story back into the public consciousness. New generations of music fans learned about the day Frank Sinatra tried to buy a song from Neil Diamond and got told no. The story was featured in podcasts, blog posts, YouTube videos, all dissecting what it meant and why it still mattered decades later. Young artists facing their own crossroads, trying to decide whether to sign with a major label or stay independent, whether to compromise their vision for commercial success or hold firm to their artistic principles, would reference the story. "I'm pulling a Neil Diamond," they'd say, meaning they were choosing integrity over money, artistic control over immediate success. The phrase entered the lexicon of the music industry, a shorthand for making the hard but right choice. Some record executives grumbled that it was making artists too demanding, too unwilling to compromise. But the smart ones understood that artists who cared deeply about their work, who were willing to fight for their vision, were the ones who created the most enduring music. They were the ones who built careers that lasted decades, not just a few hit singles. As Neil Diamond approaches 85 years old now, living with Parkinson's disease and retired from performing, he still speaks about that day in Frank's office as one of the most important in his life. "I've made a lot of decisions in my career," he said in a recent interview. "Some good, some bad. But saying no to Frank Sinatra, that was one of the good ones. Not because it was easy, it wasn't. And not because it made me rich, it didn't, at least not directly. But because it taught me who I was and what I stood for. It taught me that I was an artist, not just a commodity. And that's a lesson that served me well for the next 50 years. The offices where that meeting took place are long gone, replaced by modern buildings that house tech startups and entertainment conglomerates. Frank Sinatra's estate continues to manage his legacy, releasing archival material and protecting the Sinatra brand. Neil Diamond's catalogue continues to generate millions in royalties and introduce new generations to his music. But the simple story of an artist saying no to power and money because something mattered more, continues to resonate. It's taught in music business classes, referenced in books about negotiation and integrity, and shared among artists as a reminder of what's possible when you refuse to compromise. Now let me ask you one more question for the comments. If you were Neil Diamond in that moment, facing Frank Sinatra and enormous financial pressure, would you have sold the song? Be honest. What would it take for you to sell something deeply personal to you? Share your thoughts, because these discussions help us all understand our own values better. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that some things are more valuable than money and that integrity matters even when it's costly, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories about the moments that defined music history and the lessons they teach us about art, commerce, and staying true to yourself. Thank you for watching until the end. Remember that everything has a price, but not everything should be for sale. Remember that power and money don't give anyone the right to demand what you're not willing to give. Remember that saying no to the wrong thing is often more important than saying yes to the right thing. And remember that true respect The kind that lasts comes from standing your ground when it matters, even if you're terrified, even if everyone thinks you're crazy, even if you're facing Frank Sinatra himself. The day Frank Sinatra tried to buy a song from Neil Diamond and got told no wasn't just about one song or one negotiation. It was about what it means to be an artist, what it means to value your work, and what it means to respect someone else's right to make their own choices. Both men understood that in the end. And that's why, despite the tension and the refusal, they both walked away from that encounter with their dignity intact and their respect for each other intact. That's the real lesson of this story. Until next time, keep creating, keep standing up for what matters, and remember that the best decisions aren't always the easiest ones.